The envelope arrives on a Tuesday morning, slid under your apartment door while you're making coffee. No return address. Inside, a phone number written in blue ink, and a single sentence. They said you understand systems. You don't call right away. You're a data analyst at a mid-tier consulting firm. Decent salary, stable life. You build predictive models for supply chain optimization. Nothing glamorous, nothing dangerous. You tell yourself it's probably a recruiting pitch, maybe a headhunter who got the wrong apartment. But something about the phrasing nags at you. They said. Who said? What systems? 3 days later, your phone rings at 11 p.m. You don't recognize the number, but it matches the one from the envelope. You received our message, the voice says. Not a question. Male, older, the kind of voice that's used to being obeyed. I don't know what you're talking about, you say. Friday. 8 p.m. There's a restaurant called Marchand's on K Street. Come alone. Bring nothing electronic. If you're interested in work that matters, you'll be there. He hangs up before you can respond. You shouldn't go. Every rational part of your brain tells you this is how people disappear, how lives get complicated in ways they can't recover from. But there's another part, the part that's spent 5 years building models nobody really looks at, attending meetings that could have been emails, watching your recommendations get ignored by people who make 10 times your salary. That part wants to know what work that matters means. Friday comes. You tell yourself all day you're not going. By 7:30, you're in a cab heading downtown. Marchand's is the kind of place where the prices aren't listed on the menu. The hostess seems to expect you, leads you through the main dining room to a private area in the back. 4 people sit at a corner table. 3 men, 1 woman, all in their 50s or 60s, dressed like they came from congressional offices or law firms. The woman gestures to an empty chair. You came, she says. Good. That shows curiosity. Do you know what we do? No idea, you say. We move money, says the man to her left. Legally, strategically, and very quietly, we connect people who need funding with causes that need support. We build coalitions. We make sure the right voices get heard and the right legislation gets written. You're lobbyists, you say. The woman smiles. We're far more specific than that. Lobbyists persuade. We engineer outcomes. And we need someone who understands data architecture. Someone who can track flows without leaving fingerprints. Someone young enough not to be on anyone's radar yet. Why me? Because 3 months ago, you identified a pattern in pharmaceutical supply chain data that predicted a merger 6 weeks before it was announced. You wrote it up in an internal memo that your boss took credit for. We read that memo. You see connections other people miss. Your stomach tightens. That memo was internal, confidential. These people shouldn't have access to it. What exactly would I be doing? Tracking contributions, the man across from you says. There are limits to what individuals and organizations can donate to campaigns. There are also hundreds of legal workarounds. Political action committees, independent expenditure groups, 501(c)(4) social welfare organizations. Each has different disclosure requirements. Our clients want their support to be effective but not easily traceable. You'd build the maps. You'd find the routes. That sounds like something the FEC would be very interested in, you say. Everything we do is legal, the woman says firmly. Complicated, yes. Opaque, certainly. But legal. We have an entire legal team that reviews every structure. You wouldn't be hiding money. You'd be optimizing contribution strategies within existing regulations. And if I say no, then you finish your wine, go home, and forget this conversation happened. No pressure. No threats. But you should know the starting salary is $270,000 plus performance bonuses that typically add another $100,000. And you'd be working on things that actually shape policy, that actually matter. You should walk away. You should stand up right now and leave. But $270,000 is nearly 4 times what you make now. And they're right about one thing. You're tired of work that doesn't matter. When would I start? You hear yourself say. The woman slides a folder across the table. Monday. Your first week is mostly orientation. You meet the legal team, learn the vocabulary, hard money versus soft money, coordinated versus independent expenditures, the difference between a super PAC and a traditional PAC, the limits. Individuals can give $3,300 per election to a candidate. $5,000 per year to a PAC, $10,000 per year to a state party committee. The workarounds: unlimited donations to super PACs and 501c4 organizations, as long as those organizations don't coordinate directly with campaigns. The key, your new supervisor explains, is understanding that money is like water. It always finds a path. Our job is to design the landscape so it flows where our clients want it to go. Your first real assignment comes on day 9. A client wants to support a Senate campaign in Ohio, but doesn't want his name attached to it publicly. He can give the maximum direct contribution, but he wants to do more, much more. He's willing to commit $2 million. You spend 3 days mapping the options. A super PAC would have to disclose him as a donor, so that's out. A 501c4 doesn't have to disclose donors, but it can't make political activity its primary purpose. You build a structure. The client donates to a 501c4 focused on economic freedom advocacy. That organization grants money to a separate 501c4 focused on government accountability. That second organization then funds issue advertising that happens to align perfectly with the Senate candidate's platform. Technically, it's all independent. Technically, it's all legal. Your supervisor reviews your proposal. Clean, she says. Very clean. File it. The ads start running 2 weeks later. You see them during a football game. Senator Morrison voted to raise your taxes 17 times. Ohio deserves better. No mention of any candidate by name, but everyone knows the race it's targeting. You did that. Your architecture made that happen. The client is pleased. More assignments follow. A tech billionaire wants to influence 3 House races in Virginia without his competitors knowing he's involved. You create a network of interconnected organizations, each contributing to different super PACs. The money flowing through enough layers that tracking it back to the source would require weeks of work. Most journalists won't invest. A pharmaceutical company wants to support candidates who oppose drug price regulations but can't be seen doing so directly. You route their money through a healthcare industry trade association, then into a general business coalition, then into issue advocacy groups that attack government interference in markets. The connection exists, but you've made it so diffuse that proving coordination would be nearly impossible. You're good at this. Better than you expected. You start to recognize patterns in campaign finance reports. Can spot when someone else has built a structure similar to yours. You learn which types of organizations trigger more scrutiny, which states have looser reporting requirements, which time windows in the election cycle offer the most flexibility. 6 months in, they give you your first major client. Charles Kellerman. Real estate development, mostly commercial projects, net worth somewhere north of $800 million. He wants to be a player in national politics. Wants his calls returned by Senate leadership. Wants his issues addressed. He's willing to spend $10 million per cycle to make that happen. You meet him exactly once, in his office on the 43rd floor of a building he owns in Manhattan. He's in his early 60s. Gray hair, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that comes from decades of people saying yes to him. I don't care about parties, he tells you. I care about results. I have projects in 14 states. I need senators who understand that development creates jobs, that environmental reviews shouldn't take 5 years, that infrastructure means opportunity. Can you make that happen? I can make sure your support reaches the people who share your priorities, you say. I don't want them to share my priorities, he says. I want them to act on my priorities. There's a difference. You build him an empire. Not literally, of course, but you create the financial architecture that makes him influential. A network of organizations, each focused on specific issues: economic development, regulatory reform, infrastructure investment, job creation. Money flows between them in carefully measured amounts, supporting candidates, funding research, commissioning polling, paying for advocacy campaigns. You track every dollar, maintain spreadsheets that map the entire ecosystem. Kellerman never contributes directly to any of these organizations. His money is laundered clean through 3 layers of intermediary groups. First, within 18 months, senators take meetings with him. Their staffers call your office to ask what issues matter to your network. Legislation starts to include language that helps his projects clear regulatory hurdles faster. Nobody explicitly connects these things. Nobody has to. You're making $700,000 a year now. You've moved to a better apartment, started wearing better clothes, learned which restaurants to take clients to. You've become someone people listen to. But there are complications. The first one comes when a journalist publishes an investigation into one of your networks. She's traced money from a 501c4. You set up back to its sources, figured out that 5 different grassroots organizations all share office space in the same building, all funded by the same handful of donors. The article is damaging, not illegal, but it makes your client look like he's trying to manufacture public support that doesn't exist. Fix this, your supervisor says. Immediately. You spend a week restructuring everything. New organizations, different addresses, more layers. You make the connections so complex that even you need a flowchart to track them all. It works. The next investigative piece gets lost in the complexity, the journalist unable to prove the connections clearly enough for publication. But you start to notice something. You're not just optimizing contribution strategies anymore. You're actively obscuring them. You're building structures specifically designed to be difficult to understand. The difference feels significant. The second complication is bigger. One of the candidates your network supported wins his Senate race. 3 months later, he introduces legislation that would substantially benefit Kellerman's projects. The bill includes specific language about expedited environmental review processes for commercial developments in economically distressed areas. You recognize the language because you provided it to a think tank that your network funds, which then submitted it to the senator's office as model legislation. The bill passes. Kellerman makes $40 million on a project that would have died in regulatory review otherwise. Your performance bonus that year is $300,000. You know what this is. You've known for a while, but you've been avoiding the words. This is legalized corruption. Maybe not by the letter of the law, but by any reasonable definition. You've built a system where money buys policy outcomes, where donors get return on investment, where the public has no idea who's really advocating for what. You think about quitting. You even draft a resignation letter one night after 3 glasses of bourbon. But then you look at your bank account. You've saved nearly $1 million. You're 32 years old and financially secure in ways most people never achieve. And if you quit, someone else will do this job. Someone probably less competent, less careful about the legal boundaries. At least you keep everything technically lawful. At least you're good at it. You delete the resignation letter. The work continues. More clients, bigger amounts, more complex structures. You start tracking opposition networks too, identifying which donors fund which advocacy groups on the other side. It becomes a chess game. They move money here, you counter by moving money there. They fund attack ads, you fund response ads. The candidates are almost secondary. They're just pieces on the board. You develop relationships with people like you at other firms. There's a community of maybe 200 people nationally who really understand how the system works, who build the architectures that shape American politics. You see each other at conferences, have drinks at expensive bars, talk shop. Nobody discusses the ethics. That would be uncomfortable. Instead, you discuss strategy, tactics, which structures are getting more scrutiny, which new organizations show promise. 3 years in, something happens that changes your perspective. You're working late, reviewing filings for a client, when you notice something odd. One of the opposition networks you've been tracking has a structure that looks familiar, very familiar. Same pattern you used 18 months ago. You dig deeper, follow the money back through the layers, and realize with absolute certainty that the same firm you work for is running both sides. Different teams, different supervisors, but the same company. You're fighting against yourself. You bring it up carefully the next morning. Is it standard for us to represent clients on opposite sides of an issue? Your supervisor doesn't even look up from her computer. We represent interests, not positions. If 2 clients have different priorities, that's their business. Our job is to serve each one effectively. But doesn't that mean we're just making noise, canceling ourselves out? We're making money, she says, and we're maintaining relationships with powerful people. Whether their legislation passes or fails is frankly irrelevant to our long-term business model. The game continues either way. That night, you can't sleep. You keep thinking about all the money you've moved. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Maybe billions if you count everything every client has spent through structures you've helped design. All that money, all that effort, all that careful architecture, and it doesn't even matter who wins. The point is just to keep the system running. Keep the money flowing. Keep the powerful people engaged. You've built a machine that serves itself. But you don't quit. Because what would quitting accomplish? The machine runs whether you're part of it or not. At least this way you benefit from it. The years accumulate. You become senior leadership. Start mentoring younger analysts. Teach them how to map contribution networks, how to identify vulnerability points in opposition structures, how to maximize donor influence while minimizing disclosure. You're legitimately expert now. When journalists write about campaign finance, they sometimes quote you anonymously. When legislators discuss reform proposals, you brief clients on how to preserve their influence under different regulatory scenarios. You've helped elect dozens of politicians. You've influenced hundreds of legislative outcomes. You've moved so much money through so many structures that you've lost count. And every day you wake up and do it again, because the alternative is walking away with nothing to show for it except the knowledge of how the system really works. And that knowledge feels heavier than any amount of money. It's a Tuesday morning, almost 7 years after that first envelope. You're preparing for a meeting with a potential client, someone who wants to spend $15 million over the next election cycle. Your assistant brings you coffee. Your phone shows 47 unread emails. Outside your window, Washington, D.C. moves through its morning routine. Thousands of people heading to offices where they'll do their small parts to keep the machinery of government functioning. You think sometimes about that data analyst you used to be, building supply chain models that nobody read. That person seems impossibly naive now. That person thought systems were neutral, thought competence mattered more than connections, thought work should have meaning beyond compensation. You know better now. You've seen how power actually operates. You've built the hidden architecture that makes it function. You understand that democracy isn't really about votes or values or the will of the people. It's about money, about who can afford to fund the right organizations at the right time, about who can pay people like you to make their influence invisible. You tell yourself sometimes that you're just working within the system as it exists, that you didn't create these rules, that if you weren't doing this, someone else would be. You tell yourself these things, and they're even true. But there's another truth you've learned, one that sits heavier every year. Once you've seen how the machine really works, once you've been inside it long enough, you can't pretend it's anything other than what it is. You're not just participating in the system, you're sustaining it. Your expertise, your competence, your careful legal compliance, all of it serves to make corruption look like democracy. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. You gather your materials, check your reflection in the window. You look successful. You are successful. The potential client is waiting. The work continues.